there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from this and discussing what happened to your television station. So I know we all know what happened that day, but I want to go back to that day. It was just a normal day. Your morning news crew, they were doing what they do every single day, covering a story about a community event. And then they were gunned down on television, live on television. And this happened about 6:45 in the morning. Where were you that day?
I was in my car about 2 blocks from the television station when the news director called me and said, "Did you see it?" Which, as I said this morning, is not something you want to hear. I had a friend in the car who doesn't drive, but was going to I was giving him a ride to a 12-step meeting. So I said, I'm going to let you off, and then I've got to head to work. And about 5 minutes later, I was in my in the newsroom, and this was a bewildered newsroom. The newscast was not even off the air yet. And what had happened, as you know, was this incident with shots fired, scream, camera falls. We learned later caught the picture of the miscreant. And then what I heard was, Adam and Ellison don't respond. And then a few minutes later, I learned later, I didn't hear this, the authorities arrived on the scene and said 3 down. That included the person they were interviewing who had played dead and actually was very, very badly injured, but walked to the ambulance. God bless her. And our people, it was pretty evident to me. I'm a journalist for 40 years. I knew from all the facts that were around there that they were dead. Or what I was hoping was they were very seriously injured and could not respond. But I thought that was a very dim possibility. My job was to support the people there, help them with the information that both our viewers needed, but mostly what they needed. And so I tried to talk to, I counseled them as best I could. I made sure that somebody was on the phone to the families. I made sure somebody was in charge with the various police departments. At some point, and I lost track of time, our morning tape editor, Mike Episcopo, came to the chief photographer who was already in and said, "Look at this." It was the still frame that showed the shooter. And the chief came to me and said, "I think you got to see this. It's Bryce," which was the air name of this fellow, Flanagan. And I looked at it. I couldn't tell for sure, but they were certain because they had worked with this guy every day. And we sent that picture down to the sheriff's department. They provided it to the state police. State police did a fabulous job. Do you know how this guy got caught? He was driving up the interstate, heading in the general direction of Washington. There's a point where Interstate 81, which goes north to Harrisburg, you can veer off onto 66 and it goes to Washington. There was a state police trooper who was working a way station very close to that. And she said to her commander, "I got to go. I got to catch this guy in case he's coming this way." They didn't know where he was. They knew he was on the run. And she parked the car right at that intersection. And they have this computer program that will scan vehicle license plates as they go by. And what she had been given was the license plate of the car that was registered to this fellow. Then a few minutes later, they realized he had swapped that car at the airport for a rental car. And they gave her the rental car license plate number. Well, the computer remembers all the license plates that have gone by. And when she put that new one in, it said it went by 3 minutes ago. And so she was off to the races, caught up with him, waited for extra help, and at some point he was sending off videos and then shot himself. It was really great police work. And one of the things about this is I saw great police work in action here. I was on a federal court jury a few years ago, which was a privilege that I shouldn't have had because I was in the news business. Terrific experience where I learned about how justice does work sometimes in this country. And this experience, despite all the terror and anger and sadness, did give me a lot of good feelings about the dedication of the police community. So that was that morning. And then...
Well, how do you, because you are the leader of this television station, and
See, I can go on forever without it.
You're used to covering traumatic events, but this is happening to your staff and at your news station. You can't just shut down the news station and deal with this. You have to cover the story as well, but you also do have to worry about your employees and their mental health and their safety. How did you cover that? How did you prioritize things? And what about the employees? How did they cover that story? How were they able to do that?
A lot of people have said, and I've said, there's no manual on the wall for handling this, but that is not to say you can't prepare for trauma. Did you all get the handout this morning? Well, I wrote up this week 10 things you can do to protect your workplace against trauma, or to be ready if trauma happens. It's in there. And I had given thought over the years to what happens if one of my employees keels over at work. So I got CPR trained. I'll show you. And we've done a number of other things to tighten up security. Oh, my keys are in the other car. But I have a little pouch that has a little mask in it I can put on to do CPR. Nobody put it to the test, please. And we have an AED, defibrillator in our place. So, and I knew that if one of my employees died at work, the first person I was going to call was a member of the clergy who is married to somebody at work. I knew who the second person I was going to call, the third person. I didn't plan for it to be a shooting, a violent incident, but I had thought through some of the steps I would take. So I kicked those into action. And then the news director, who lives a good deal further from work, got in, and I said, and already the media were on our doorstep a couple hours after I made the announcement on the air. Oh, I made the decision that I would announce it on the air. I have enough experience to keep my cool, and I'm a former journalist, and I wasn't going to put my anchors in the position of announcing to the world what had to be announced. And I channeled Tom Brokaw when he announced the death of his colleague, Tim Russert. I remember that afternoon. I knew it was coming because I'd been tipped, but I turned on the TV, and Brokaw happened to be in the newsroom, even though he was retired from his regular job, and he said, "It's my sad duty to report." Now, that's the way I started, and I did it. And then I came off the air and out of the studio, and I already saw myself up on Fox News doing what I had just done. It was very bizarre. So the news director and I said, there has to be a front person. I'll be the front person. You run the newsroom. We got to cover the story, but we also have to take care of our people. So we got EAP counselors in immediately, clergy, off-duty employees who came in, our corporate vice president, whom we were just talking about.
Marcy?
Marcy Burdick, the best boss I've ever had in my life, and my dear friend, flew in, left an event that she had planned and flew in from South Bend, and we had colleagues fly in from Springfield and Wichita, and then the community was just incredibly supportive.
Did your reporters cover these stories during this time, or did you have those people from the sister station come in and handle this?
Both. That day we assigned our newest reporter, who did not know them well. She's a good reporter, but she just happened to be new. So she was handling the nuts and bolts. We did a particularly lousy job of covering the investigation. It wasn't in our heart to do it. We were more focused on the loss. Others covered the investigation and uncovered court documents and things that illuminated the story a little bit. So we didn't do a particularly good job of that, but I wasn't expecting us to.
Right.
And the community was fine with what we did, which was to memorialize the people and give the overview.
Did you have reporters or news anchors that just said, I cannot cover this story?
Well, of course, Chris, the boyfriend, our 6 o'clock anchor, the boyfriend of Allison, was in shock, I think it's fair to say.
Sure.
He still came out and did interviews and showed pictures and all of that, and as much as he felt he could, but he wouldn't come back for 2.5 to 3 weeks. Other reporters, well, that day nobody left the building. until we were certain that we weren't going to be next at our building. And the second call I got, the first call I got that morning was from my competitor, general manager at the NBC station, and said, whatever you need, we'll shoot your video today. And they did, and we had a newscast at 5 and 6. And so, they didn't have to leave that day.
Right.
And then we held strategy discussions in the newsroom. Mostly I wasn't in them because I was doing the other stuff, about, okay, what do we do? Do we send a third and fourth person out with every crew? And we just covered the news as best we could. Everybody in the newsroom knew that we couldn't shirk from our job of covering the news. Now, they said, we did not do the regular cut-ins in the CBS this morning at 7:25, 7:55, 8:25. We didn't know what to say. 8:40, we went on the air. Then somebody said, what do we do at noon? And I said, here's what I think we ought to do. Go on, we'll talk about the big story, and then when we're done with all the elements we have, we'll just put a memorial screen till 12:30 when the soap operas come on. It's what we did. It relieved stress. Then we had a memorial gathering in the community room that we have at the station. 60, 70 of our employees were there, and said some prayers, shared some reminiscences, tried to bolster their feelings of their good feelings. Mm-hmm. And but I'll tell you, it's been a long haul.
I can only imagine. It hasn't been too long ago that this happened.
2.5 months, is that right?
And I know that we as journalists, and we talked about this today, we're used to covering tragedies and we're used to getting those stories out. And I think probably your journalists, maybe that was a little therapeutic also to be in that mode. Well,
they certainly learned a lot. But we made some right decisions. With only a couple of exceptions, we did not allow the media beyond our front lobby. We had to continue to function as a news outlet. Mm-hmm. And so we allowed the AP photographer in as sort of a pool to take some pictures. At one point, I think we let ABC in because they were being nice. We were a CBS station, so read that any way you want. And they did a wonderful job on 2020 that Friday night.
Well, an event like this, it's tragic, and working in a newsroom, it's like a family. It's not like just your colleagues. I mean, we really are a big family. And so when something like this happens, so tragic, it can bring a family together, but there's also a destructive element to it. There can be. The shooter, he had a history with you. There were red flags, and he was fired 2 years prior to this. Did you feel any backlash from your employees who maybe thought you all could have done something more on the front end of this to stop something like this from happening?
Yes.
Tell me about it.
Most people understood at their conscious level that you cannot predict that somebody's going to do this 2.5 years later.
Right.
You think that the worst danger is in that first month. It did bother people that he was still living in town. They would see him at Home Depot or wherever. And although he was a hot-tempered person, I fired a lot of hot-tempered people in my life. And I had one stalk me for 25 years. I'll tell you about that in a minute, because it took an interesting turn. Most of the blame went to the news director who hired him and eventually had to fire him, who was no longer on the scene. But I think there were people who said, well, we should have fired him sooner. And my answer is, does that mean he wouldn't have come back and killed somebody? The good thing is that everybody saw that we are thorough in the way, when those documents came out, thorough in the way we review people and coach them to performance improvement. I mean, it was a textbook HR case.
Right.
But people are acting out in a number of ways. An incident came up a few weeks later, very complicated incident, but one in which employees dreamed up that there was a threat continuing threat. And instead of informing me or the news director, they went right to the state police. And
Because they didn't trust you?
well, some of these employees, there was 2 or 3 of them involved, 4. And what one of them said was, and it involved posting on a website of a fellow employee. And one of them said, we thought if we went straight to you, you'd allow that employee to destroy the stuff that was on the website. I got very upset with these people, very upset. For the first time in my 9 years there, I said to somebody, get out of my office. And then I realized the reality was that there was a lack of trust going on, and that it was probably there before the incident, but this exacerbated it and brought it to the surface. So I called them each in and I said, I spent last night writing up a 2-page memo to you on what you did, which I still think was not the right thing to do. But I'm not going to give you that memo because I think what you've done is illuminated something that's going on here. And we got to work on that.
How do you work on that?
Well, I talked to each of them, assured them that I took it seriously, that, again, the action was not in keeping with good sense, which they didn't understand, but that I sensed that there was something deeper. So I wrestled with this for a little while. I meet with an executive group every Wednesday, once a month on a Wednesday, and it's the meeting is brokered by a business psychologist friend, and it's bank presidents, university presidents, business leaders. About 6, 7 of us gather, depending on who's available. And on one Wednesday morning, about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, I poured my heart out to them, and I said, I don't know how to deal with this. And they all said, Jeff, you're in over your head, get some help. And my psychologist friend, I was getting help for myself already, but that's not what we're talking about, got me the names of people who deal almost exclusively or primarily in the area of trauma recovery. And I found a consulting firm in Los Angeles that comes into police departments after an officer is killed or after there's a traumatic incident. They go into other workplaces where somebody may have jumped off the roof and recovery is particularly difficult. And he's coming in Monday to meet with the managers and then to walk around and talk to employees. He knows the names of some employees who might be particularly troubled and want to talk. Mm-hmm. And his mission is to guide me through, or guide us through, a clear path to a new normal, where we not only deal with the traumatic issues, but some of those underlying issues that revealed themselves in this. Mm-hmm. I'm going to retire soon. And we're changing ownership at my TV station. Add that to the trauma, okay? Because we love the company we work for now. We like the company we're going to work for. But I don't want to leave unfinished business. And to the credit of this gal Marcy, whom I work for at the old company, she said, go ahead and spend the $25,000 to get this consulting work done, because none of us wants to leave unfinished business. And although I don't know when I'm going to retire precisely, this will almost certainly still be going on during my successor's term.
Sure.
And I want to leave her or him a clearer path than I currently feel we have.
In the days following this event that happened to you, I was talking with my colleagues and people that I used to work for, and many of us, most of us said we have worked in a newsroom with a person who has anger issues, who is a hothead, who we have felt threatened even if we work with them. In some cases, there may be help available to those distraught employees. Did you have anything in place like that prior to this, like anger management,
well, he was directed,
therapy?
Yeah, we have an employee assistance program which provides counseling and tools to people, and he was directed to get this. But, the thing about counseling is if you direct somebody to get it, it's not as effective as if they are paying for it and they're getting it on their own volition. Let me talk for a minute about anger. In 1989, I hired a guy I should have known better. Had to fire him 3 months later because he was whacked out. He was good at anchoring, but he thought everybody around him were idiots, and he did coke in the bathroom and stuff. And I'm not this kind. He stalked me and my wife for 25 years. Now, not in person, but we never knew. On my home on the island, where we have a home in Maine, he said, "I know your address. I might drop in on you sometime." He followed me from job to job, and every place I would go, I would inform my lawyer and the local authorities about this, post pictures of him at the front desk. And he's laid off me for about 5 years. But I check on him every now and then on the web. Thank God for the web. Figured out he got a job late last year at a startup newsroom in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And then after a few months, he disappeared from all their marketing. And I got in touch with a guy named Tim Bush, who is the CEO of Nexstar. They own that station. And Tim called me and said, "Jeff, if that guy walked back into that station, the general manager would kill him." And that's the kind of person he was. He's been fired and carried out of every television station. Very similar in terms of his, what we later learned about Flanagan. The son of a bitch was indicted last week.
Wow.
For stalking a general manager and his wife and making death threats. This one in Texas. And I called the prosecutor, the United States Attorney's Office, and I said, I want you all to know that there's a trail here. And they may have already known it. But I talked to my wife about that, and I talked to colleagues. Again, that same executive group met. And I said, do I put myself out there? Do I take that risk? And I got a call back from a state trooper investigator. What do they call them in Texas? The Texas
Rangers?
Must have been a Texas Ranger. And I'm gonna do what I can to help in this case, because I suffered and my wife suffered for all this time. And so I want to segue from that into anger, because that's my topic these days when I talk. If you were bleeding profusely, I would say, I think you're in need of medical attention. I'm going to help you and get it for you. But if you have anger, we don't look at it the same way. How many of you have in your life someone you walk on eggshells around because you don't know what's going to set her or him off? Right? There is help for anger. Some of it is counseling. Some of it is medicinal. I had anger until I was 59 years old. I don't know why my wife stayed with me as long as she did. I did not abuse her. I was not physically abusive, but I was demeaning. And I had to be smarter, stronger, better than everybody. And since what is this year? Since 2011, when I got a lot of help for my anger, and it goes back to childhood, of course, all anger does. And I'm not talking about normal anger. If you're angry because of what happened in Paris, or angry about what happened in Roanoke, that's normal, but I'm talking about constant anger. We need to have the ability to say, I sense you're really angry, and I think you're angry a lot of the time. I know where there's help for that. Let me help you. And yet, as willing as we are to do that with somebody with a broken leg, we are unwilling to do it with people who show anger. Now, I'm not saying anything would have changed this case we have in Roanoke, but when I see what happened to this guy, Gabe Caggiano, by the way, and then what I know what happened with me, and then what I saw what happened, and when I realized there are people in my life I walk on eggshells around, and people probably walked on eggshells around me for a while. There is something we can do, and I encourage you to do it, and to say, I want to be your friend, but mostly I want to And what friends do is say, I see signs of trouble, let me help you. End of speech, end of lecture.
I mean, I think that's good advice. It's hard to do sometimes.
Yes, it
People
is.
who are angry, they
get angry.
They get angrier and they don't want to hear it. So that can be difficult. Another thing I want to talk about is, and we've kind of talked about this today, as reporters, we are trained to go out and cover these events. Mm-hmm. And after the 6 o'clock news is over and the live shot is finished, oftentimes we can't go home to our friends and family and vent about it because we have to pull a double. And then we have to come in early the next morning and work all the angles and talk to all those victims. And so we kind of become numb to dealing with these sorts of issues. What do you think newsrooms can do to help their reporters and their employees deal with traumatic events? Because as we were talking about, PTSD is prevalent in the military, but maybe, like people say, you're just a journalist, you can't have PTSD.
Sure can. I believe that management that encourages sharing, that has Bob Steele's decision-making model up on the wall, that says, let's talk about this. Let's get the photographers and the associate producers in, the production people. Mm-hmm. Let's get them all in. Let's have discussions in the newsroom about how we feel about things and what the right course of action is. Yep. If you breed an atmosphere of that, people will be much likely to share their troubles, their aspirations. If you also breed a place where there aren't ramifications of just sharing, there aren't negative ramifications, mm-hmm. I should say. I think that's good too. I think education about, we used to call sensitivity training. You know, Allison was an up-and-coming star. Would do anything, had real natural talent on the air, and that brought, I'm going to use, we used to say, that brought the claws out, okay? I would never say that now. But there were people who were jealous of her talent and her ascent, and they were female. Because they envisioned that there's certain anchor slots that go to females. And she was working her way into it. One of them was particularly hard on her. And because she wanted to anchor like nobody's business, and she wasn't as good. And the last email wrote by this person to Allison, was very snarky. After they died, this is the person who put together the golf tournament, who put together this thing, who did everything he could, and some would say to assuage her guilt. She's since moved on to a job that I think she's not going to do well in, because this person actually had a lot of talent. She just had this mental block, this thing going on. And so a little sensitivity training, if we could have gotten through to her, mm-hmm. I'm not sure we could have, also helps.
Mm-hmm. And it has to start from the top down.
It has to, and we have to be there. The worst thing about training in the workplace occurs when the manager doesn't go to the training. I won't do training, and I do a lot of training. I won't do training that the manager is not there for at least one of the sessions, so she knows what to follow up on. She doesn't have to follow up on everything I train on, but if she's not there, she's going to follow up on nothing that I train on. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it has to be top down in that the top has to be involved. But we also have to say to people, what do we need training on? What are we weak on? Where are our gaps? Mm-hmm. What resources do you need? Great question to ask all the time. What resources do you need? Not what can I do for you, which is, by the way, what I say, but what resources do you need? Did you have employees who wanted to quit after this? Yep. Did you have employees that quit after this? Nobody quit without a job, but it speeded up some people's egress. One or two. Mm-hmm. One or two.
Well, we talked about this a lot, of course, in the hours and days that followed. This was some great conversation for our students and our professors to have. And a lot of the students and a lot of the students' parents were saying, wait a minute, we don't want you to go into this business. But I want to end this discussion on a positive note, because this is a noble business. Being a journalist is a good thing. Searching out the truth and telling it is a great responsibility, and it's a rewarding job. So has this affected the way you view the profession?
When I was interviewed on Sunday after the killings by the fellow at CNN who wrote the brilliant article for CNN Business, Brian Seltzer. Was that his name?
He's been the New York Times.
Brilliant article. The best article that's been written on what we went through, published about 2 weeks ago. But on that, he hosts a program called Reliable Sources on Sunday, and I was on it. And he did about 15 minutes with me, and then he said, how has, we have the typical satellite farm on our front doorstep, you know the image, and all these reporters do it. And he said, how has this changed your view of the journalists out there? And I said, it has elevated my opinion. They came in, I'm not happy that it dies, that the story sort of drifts away after 2 days to the hurricanes or whatever. But they were respectful, and they did their job. And they were out to scoop each other on what they could find out from the courts and whatever. They did it legitimately, and they were respectful, but they worked hard to ply their trade, and I am delighted to see that. It's a good lesson for all of us on how you pursue the truth. This is a rewarding business. I wouldn't trade the career I've had for anything in the world. It's been the best. And it still can be. Everything's changing. All the methods of communicating are changing. It doesn't matter. The job of journalist will still be there. But if you are like a lot of, I know we're running over, but I'd like to finish this. A lot of people come into my office and want to know about reporter jobs. I don't hire the reporters, but sometimes I get to talk to them. And I say, well, tell me about what is the role of the journalist in American society? And I'd like to share with you some of the answers that I get that I'd like you never to say. I like meeting people. I think I'm good at interviewing people. I like to tell stories. That's not bad. But the one who comes in and says, I have a responsibility to inform the public what's going on in their government and in other institutions, and to shine a light where a light is not being shined. And one actually said, I like to dig and look under rocks, which is what I say. That's what you want to say, and that'll get you a job. For me, it'll also help if you pass my three-word spelling test. But that's what the job of journalist is. And my biggest scoop was a sports story in 1974 involving the horse Secretariat. I reported to the world that Secretariat was indeed capable of producing offspring, had put a test mare in foal, as they say. Well, that's my biggest scoop, kids. But I worked for scoops, and that's what got me excited. As I said to somebody earlier, too few of our young journalists run into the newsroom and say, hold the front page. When I was producing the news 30 years ago in Washington at WJLA, I was the executive producer. Occasionally I would produce the newscast at 6. And there was a reporter in Washington by the name of Jim Clark. And the phone would ring at 4 o'clock. Before email, before cell phones, I'm not sure whether we had even a newsroom computer system. At 4 o'clock, I was sitting there putting the newscast together. Phone would ring. This is Clark. I've got your lead. Click. And I would put down, Clark, lead, 2 minutes. I might find out at 5:45 what that was. He might come in and say, I'll give you your lead in, I'm going into the edit room, just trust me. Well, process be damned. That was the kind of reporter I wanted to be and work with. And I will tell you, the rewards of that are tremendous. But be serious about it. If you be serious about it, you'll have a lot of fun doing it. Not on August 26th, the days after, but there are a lot of better days than that. And I invite you to be a serious journalist, whether your topic is sports or news or some beat that we haven't even dreamed up yet. It's just a wonderful career. I'll stick around if anybody wants to.
Yeah, do we have time for some questions?
If you have to leave, go ahead, but I'll take any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Would you speak to how you cope with having a stalker? I mean, that's not something that these kids might be aware of, but I have several coworkers who have legitimate threats, people who will sit in the parking lot, watch them come into work, make comments about where they live.
She asked how we dealt with this stalker. I have real concern for my on-air female employees. I've got some being potentially stalked right now. Weirdo messages, things like that. We pay a lot of attention to that. And we take steps to guard their well-being. We have upgraded security in our building 3 times now, and I've done it elsewhere. As for me, I think he's a coward. Okay. I've considered sending a private investigator to him to talk him down, to scare him off. Over the years, I decided he's just a drug-addicted, drunk loudmouth, and probably didn't really pose a physical danger to me. But who knows? So I do take those precautions. But you know what? You can't hide. I've got 2 homes, and it's sort of public knowledge. You know, as a reporter, it's pretty easy to find out what property somebody has. You go online and look up the property records. We behave prudently. But you can go to the movies in Colorado, or school in Connecticut, or a cafe in Paris, and be the next victim. And so you got to live life despite very troubling times. Yes, ma'am. Oh, yes, 1 and 2.
First of all, thank you so much for making time for
You're
us.
the anchor.
What?
You the news anchor I met earlier?
Yes, I am, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And I apologize, I am a little tired, been up a little late.
Oh, you're on the 3 a.m. shift?
The 7 a.m. shift, but yes, been up since 3. Yes. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. We really appreciate it. I know that we are all benefiting very much from this open conversation. I do want to ask, in our discussion group, we spoke about how to keep this idea of having an open newsroom, being almost vulnerable in a sense of talking about mental illness. And I feel like that's something that in our world today is being brought up more and more. But in your newsroom, how do you guys keep that idea of, okay, the grief is not over on August 28th, or the grief might not be over in 2 years. You might have issues. I know that your female anchor, when she had to have seen that, when it came back to her after seeing the shooting, her grief, I can't even imagine. How do you keep that an open conversation in your newsroom, and how do you not make it, I guess, awkward to talk about mental illness? And I mean, that might not be you might not have an answer, but just can you shed some light on that?
Well, we handle it by hiring only people who are mentally ill. Okay, so...
We're journalists, yes.
Okay. There is a great temptation to have said after 45 days or 60 days, okay, it stops now. Actually, my news director, under great stress, put out an email that said, I am tired of this, the gossip, the character assassination, whatever, and it was 2 pages of rant. And being the good manager, I called her in, because I thought she was going to hold a meeting. And I'm not going to give you details about what was in the email, but it was out of keeping with normal behavior. And she is a fabulous news director. Okay? Let me put it, I'm on the record when I talk. I'm going to ask you, if you're a reporter and you want more information about this, talk to me. But she later backed it down by saying, you can tell the frustration that's going around. Understand that I have it just as you do. Let's start having group meetings in which we talk about this, ignore some of the other stuff in there. So it's affected everybody at every level in our building. And I think we're being forgiven our missteps. But I'll tell you, it still takes 25 to 40% of my time. The security issues, memorials, the public, this kind of thing where I really want to share. So we're working on it very hard. And this consultant I have coming in Monday, one of the people who was there in the morning said, please, I don't want to talk to him. I've moved on. Others will just pour their hearts out. So we just have to be patient and defy that temptation to say, it stops now. All grieving is over. I'm Jewish, and in the Jewish faith, we do something called sitting Shiva. And that means for 30 days you hang black over the mirrors and you wear black. And the more traditional Jews do it. We don't do it exactly that way. But people say, golly, you do that for 30 days? And I say, yeah. The reason is we do it for only 30 days. And then we move on. And I wish we could do that in our organization. But it's more complicated than that. So I'm glad you asked. Yes, sir.
Jeff, this story was absolutely ubiquitous at the time that it happened, and it's so hard to unplug now with digital communication. So talk a little bit about that. It must be very awful to have been hearing about it everywhere you went and at the time. So
You want to know the worst thing?
Sure.
Go onto YouTube and look this up. Do you know what the first 3 or 4 videos are? Hoax. This was all a hoax.
Oh my God.
Because Andy Parker, Allison's father, was an actor in amateur theater, and he wanted to bolster his acting career or do this gun thing. So they take apart the video. It's like the Zapruder video of Kennedy being shot, and do frame by frame. Well, this couldn't have happened because, and then he couldn't have sent a text, and so it must be a fake. Well, I'm not going to sit here and debunk the hoax theorist, but one of my senior managers got so angry about one of these that he figured out it was coming from a guy who worked near the TV station. And he called the guy on the phone at the store where he worked, and they got into it on the phone. And Mike was so frustrated by this, he got in his car and drove over there. I think it was a pawn shop. What do they carry in pawn shops? Guns. So we went over there and walked in, and according to the way Mike tells it, said, "Do you recognize my voice?" The guy said, "Yes." And they got into it. And the guy, he reduced him to tears, because Mike was the guy who went and identified the bodies. He was my senior manager, went over to the scene, and the hoax stuff really hit him hard. And the guy said, "What do you want me to do?" He said, "I want you to go on the air and retract everything you said. And retract everything you said." Well, that was one small victory amongst all of this terrible stuff, terrible unfeeling stuff by men who are sitting up late at night and have nothing to do except be angry. And some of the anger that's been out there, especially directed at Andy, he brought some of it on himself, but has been particularly difficult to deal with. But I will tell you, 99% of what we've seen online has been supportive, has been wonderful, has shown me the value of local television, local broadcast-free over-the-air television in the lives of people. And that medium is threatened by what the FCC is doing to marginalize local broadcast television in favor of cable and satellite. And you're going to miss us when we're gone, to quote that song, the Cup song. You're going to miss me when I'm gone. So I really have to focus on all the good stuff out there.
Jeff, we have a question back here.
Yes?
So you talked a little bit about anger, but generally speaking, what other factors do you think have contributed to the rise of violence perpetrated usually by the mentally ill?
Well, my rabbi says, she gave a sermon the Friday night after this happened, and boy, I was there. She said, you know, they say guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? She said, no. People with guns kill people. So you cannot separate the anger from the availability of guns. Now, am I saying, you know, do you remember that scene? My mother in the last few years watched the same movie every afternoon, The American President, with Michael Douglas and
Annette
Bening. And that news conference where he finally came out and said, I'm going to take Bob on. He said, and I'm going to put all this other stuff, and the gun bill is my #1 priority, and I'm going to go door to door if I have to do that to get the guns. Well, I don't think that's going to work. Guns are out there. But we have to look at the loopholes, like the gun show loophole, and other ways of regulating guns so that people who have legitimate interest in them can get them. But who needs an Uzi? You know? I don't care about the Second Amendment. Who needs an Uzi? Not that people always use Uzis, but it's an example. So Andy Parker, Allison's father, is on a campaign about guns. Chris the anchor, is very close to Andy, but he's had to separate himself from Andy on the political thing because Chris is a journalist. I'm a former journalist. I think our job is to shed light on these issues. It's hard to do when the NRA controls Congress, but we have to report on violence. We have to cover it. We have to show people alternatives and impact of things. And am I way off from your question? Okay. And that's our obligation as a local, free, over-the-air broadcast station, is to show more ownership of the issue so that people can make informed, intelligent decisions. But, you know, I could go on about NRA and its control of Congress. I will defend to my death the right of the NRA to say whatever it wants. Truth, fiction, whatever. But we have a political system in which that lobby has control of the government in terms of that one issue. And we have to look at that, just as we have to look at the influence of PACs on elections and everything else that has changed over the years because of one person, the 5th vote on the Supreme Court. So all kinds of stuff swirling around. It's our job as journalists to shed light on.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's another question out there. All right.
Well, my email address, if you ever want to talk, is jmarks@WDBJ7.com. It's easy to find on our website, jmarks@WDBJ7.com. I have some cards. I'll engage you anytime on this subject or any subject related to what we do, because I enjoy these settings and I enjoy coming and sharing and listening to what your questions are and being informed about what your concerns are and what's on your mind.
Well, we appreciate you talking to us about this. Certainly, it's an important dialogue, and it's something that we all need to be aware of and really start talking about, I believe.
Tiffany, thank you.
Thank you.